Hi everyone, this is Ashley, and I'm so excited because I'm here to share something with you that has been on my heart for quite some time now. It's regarding the book of Ruth. I'm pretty sure that all of you are familiar with the book of Ruth, and usually when we hear people talk about the book of Ruth, we hear them make it out to be a love story about Ruth and how she finds her husband. A lot of people try to use that story as a way of coaching women and teaching women how we can make ourselves available to our husband. But here is the problem with that. There are so many more messages and lessons to be gleaned from the book of Ruth. And it's so much more than a love story. I would say it's not a love story. It's a story of redemption, of God's mercy. It tells how God uses everything, the good and the bad, for our good, and how He blesses us beyond our biggest and wildest imaginations. It tells a story of how God accepts people regardless of your past and who you once were, what you once believed, into His family. And so today I want to just speak about the book of Ruth and how we got it all wrong. Okay, so for those of you who don't know much about the book of Ruth, I'm gonna just give a little recap. It's a very short book. There are only 4 chapters in the book, and each chapter has about 22 verses. So it's very short, but there's just so much in the story of Ruth that it really takes for you to just sit back and really dive in and take it piece by piece and study and be able to glean and learn things from the book of Ruth, and not just kind of gloss over it and say, oh, Ruth found her husband because she made herself available. It's so much deeper than that. So let's go ahead and start. I'm not going to read, of course, the entire book of Ruth, but I would like to start at the beginning of Ruth, and it tells you a little bit about Naomi and Ruth and where they're from, and you'll start to see why that's significant in the story as we read. Okay, so let me pull it open. We'll open the book of Ruth, and I'm reading from NIV, the New International Version, and it's just a little simple Bible that I have. I used to use this when I taught children's church, and I went through and read all of the other Bible that I had and have notes all over it, and so I wanted to start fresh with the new book, and so it's NIV. Chapter 1, it says, in the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. So a man from Bethlehem in Judah, together with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab. The man's name was Elimelech. His wife's name was Naomi. And the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem, Judah, and they went to Moab and lived there. So this is very significant, okay? You have Naomi and her husband. They are from Judah. They live in Bethlehem, which is located in Judah, and they're Christians, okay? They believe in the God in heaven, and they are experiencing a famine in their land. So they decide to take their 2 sons, and go to Moab. And Moab is a land that is known to be like an enemy of Israel, okay, of the people of God. And they are not believers. They are non-Christian. They worship idols. Okay, they worship man-made gods. And so Naomi and her husband, they go there to Moab with their 2 sons because they're trying to escape the famine. They're trying to figure out, a better way to live, because there is a famine in their hometown. And when they get there, their two sons marry two women. One woman's name is Ruth, and the other woman's name is Orpah. Okay, and this is significant because these two women are Moabite women. That means that they don't know the God in heaven. They don't know the one and true God in heaven that we worship. They worshiped man-made gods. And so basically while they're there, Naomi's husband dies, okay? And sometime later, about 10 years later, Ruth's husband dies and Orpah's husband dies. So here we have Naomi with her daughter-in-laws, and they're all widowed, okay? And they're widowed women, which is very significant at the time because this is a time when women relied heavily on their husbands to provide for them materially and financially. So to be a widow was a devastating thing, Of course, you're mourning the loss of your husband. You miss them, you love them, it's hard adjusting to life without your spouse, but you're now left to fend for yourself. And, there are ways that women could do that, of course, but, some women who were widowed were pretty much at the mercy of people and their generosity. They were at the mercy of other believers who were willing to give what they had to care for the widows. So they're devastated, and what happens is Naomi decides that she's gonna go back home. She's gonna go to Judah. She's gonna take her daughter-in-laws with her and try to set up a life in Judah. Because what happened is they heard some news that God was in the blessing business in Judah. It says in verse 6, chapter 1, it says, when Naomi heard in Moab that the Lord had come to the aid of his people by providing food for them, she and her daughters-in-law prepared to return home from there. Okay, and so it says, with her two daughters-in-law, she left the place where she had been living and set out on the road that would take them back to the land of Judah. Okay, so Naomi is going to go back home. Okay, but midway or sometime, in their journey, Naomi stops and she says, daughters, don't come with me. I have nothing to offer you. I'm old. I can't give sons anymore. And even if I were to bear a son and raise him for him to be old enough to marry you all, that would just be, so much time from now. It says here in verse 11, it says, but Naomi said, return home, my daughters. Why will you come with me? Am I going to have any more sons? Who would become your husbands? Return home, my daughters. I am too old to have another husband. Even if I thought there was still hope for me, even if I had a husband tonight and then gave birth to sons, will you wait until they grew up? Will you remain unmarried for them? No, my daughters, it is more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord's hand has turned against me. And that's so significant for so many different reasons. We have Naomi who loves her daughters, and her daughters-in-law love her. And she says, go, there's no hope for me. Naomi was in a state of devastation. And Naomi is a believer, okay? And I'll talk more about that later. But she's a believer that's going through something really tough right now, like we all are. And sometimes we're quick to judge people when we see them kind of having a pity party. We judge them, and you have to, remind those people who's in control and remind them to humble themselves before the Lord and put their trust in the Lord. But we're all human and we go through that. And we can be believers and love the Lord and know the word. But all of us get knocked down sometimes. And Naomi's in that state. She's very devastated. And so she says, go away. She's at the point where she really believes that God has turned his fist against her. And how many of us have felt like that? How many of us have felt like, oh, God must be punishing me? I just listened to someone about 2 or 3 days ago. He called me and he said he thinks that God is just against him, and life can sometimes have you thinking that. And, this is the point in the story where we have to really stop and look at ourselves and say, God, what state of heart am I in? What state is my heart in right now? It's easy to kind of wallow in, self-pity, and that's normal. And I would never, and I would say never let anyone make you feel bad about that. But stop a second and remember that Naomi's in this state of devastation. And we get like that sometimes. But as you start to read the story, you'll see that Naomi, she's so devastated right now, but she doesn't know that God is going to use everything that she's going through right now for her good. And so she tells her daughters to turn around. They mourn. Orpah decides to leave, but Ruth decides to stay. Okay? And this is very significant. She says to her mother-in-law, don't urge me. This is chapter 1, verse 16. Don't urge me to leave you or turn back from you. Where you go, I will go. And where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. And that is just amazing, because here is a Moabite woman, a woman that grew up worshiping gods, like man-made gods, and Naomi was of the faith, and her walk was so strong that she was able to influence Ruth. She was able to influence Ruth to start worshiping our God in heaven, and there's so much to learn from that. Is Naomi perfect? No. She's in a state where she's bitter right now. She says, she asks, Lord, why have you turned your fist against me? So she feels neglected by God. But obviously, she's lived a Christian walk she's had a Christian walk that encouraged someone else. And that's one thing that we can learn. Our walk, our discipleship, our faithfulness to the Lord can impact even non-believers. And, the Bible doesn't say that Naomi was aggressive and, judgmental. She didn't try to beat Ruth over the head with the Bible, but she lived a Christian life. She was faithful to the Lord. And because of that, because of the love Naomi showed Ruth and Orpah, she impacted Ruth so much that Ruth said, I'm going wherever you go. I'm going to leave my land, my home, and everything that I know there. I'm going to go where you go. And I'm not going to just go where you go. I'm going to worship the God that you worship. And so there's a lot to learn from that. One, we're not perfect. Even as believers, we have our ups and downs. Like I always say, I can't stand those super saints, that's what I call them, where they act like they never feel hurt or disappointed. They never feel, a little bit of discontentment. Now, you don't want to stay in that state of mind. You don't want your heart to stay there. But it's normal to feel those things. And Naomi is going through that. And had she not been so faithful before, Ruth would have said, I don't want to worship that God. But apparently Naomi was so faithful to the Lord that Ruth, she knew her. She said, she knew that she was just going through something. She said, I'm going to worship your God, And so we're going to have some hard times, but just remember that your walk, your faithfulness could be the reason why somebody decides that they're going to worship our God in heaven. So basically they decide to go to the land of Judah, okay? And while they're there, Naomi instructs Ruth to go to the fields and glean from the fields there. Okay, there was a man who was a relative of Naomi. His name is Boaz. And Ruth said to Naomi, "Let me go to the fields and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone in whose eyes I find favor." Naomi said to her, this is in chapter 2, verse 2. Naomi said to her, "Go ahead, my daughter." So she went out, entered the field, and began to glean behind the harvesters. Now, so what that means is basically that she would go with other women and pick up the leftover grains, the leftover crops. So let's say you're a farmer and you're picking up your harvest. As you're picking it up, there are bound to be some things that fall behind you. And so there were people like Ruth, for various reasons, who would go to the fields of different farmers and glean and pick up what was left over. And so imagine the state that she's in. That's similar to, you being a homeless person. You don't have a job. You can't afford food. You decide, I'm going to go stand outside of a restaurant and see, if somebody will give me their leftover food, or see at the end of the night if the restaurant owner or manager will let me take anything to go, anything that was left over. And so she went in a state of just trying to survive, a state of trying to get by day. So many of us are in that state. But if you keep reading, you'll see the magnificence of God through this story, because Ruth just went, with a humble heart, with devotion to her mother-in-law, and just trying to get a day's worth of meal for herself and for her mother-in-law. But she gets so much more than that. The story goes on, and Boaz notices Ruth. Okay, and this is what it says. It says in chapter 2, verse 5, Boaz asked the overseer of his harvesters, "Who does that young woman belong to?" The overseer replied, "She is the Moabite who came from Moab with Naomi. She said, 'Please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the harvesters.' She came into the field and has remained here from morning till now, except for a short rest in the shelter." Okay? And so what did they notice about Ruth? They noticed that she was faithful. She was working hard. Sometimes God gives us something to do and we grumble about it, we complain. We don't want to, take this job because it's beneath us. We can't go do this hard work for ourselves because, well, life shouldn't be that hard. Other people don't have to do that. Ruth humbled herself, and she didn't just go on the field to glean after harvesters before her. She gleaned for herself and for her mother-in-law. She wanted enough to be able to take home for herself and for someone that she loved. And Boaz noticed that. He first noticed her, but then he asked his overseer about her, and that was what the overseer noticed. And I think that's so important. Ruth eventually meets her husband, but what was noticeable about her was her faithfulness, her love, her humility. Okay, and so basically, Boaz says to Ruth, "My daughter, listen to me. Don't go and glean in another field, and don't go away from here. Stay here with the women who work for me. Watch the field where the men are harvesting, and follow along after the women. I have told the men not to lay a hand on you. And whenever you are thirsty, go and get a drink from the water jars the men have filled." Okay? And Ruth says, she bows down and she asks him, "Why have I found such favor in your eyes that you notice me, a foreigner?" And that is so significant. Here Ruth is. She's just coming to glean in the field, to see what leftover she can get. And God has already started to make provisions for her. He's already started to take, this Moabite woman, this woman that used to not even believe that he existed, who used to worship idols, and because she's given her faith over to the Lord, and because she left what was familiar with her and put her faith into the Lord and showed her love to Naomi, her mother-in-law. You see God already like weaving things together, and she wanted just a day's supply of food, and she gets there, and what does she have? He says, don't go to any other field. Some people believe that, Ruth was known for being a very beautiful woman, and Boaz says, I have told the men not to lay a hand on you. So she's found favor. She's found favor. She's found protection. She's found way more than what she even expected. And she's just a Moabite woman. She's a widow, a Moabite woman who's come all the way from another land, not knowing what to expect. And God has already started weaving all these things together. Who would have thought that Naomi would leave her land, go to Moab, come back with, a woman that's a Moabite woman, and come across Boaz, come across a relative of her. And that's significant because, that this was a time when, your relatives, people, and your family could redeem land that was lost. So Boaz was a kinsman redeemer. He would be able to redeem the land that Naomi's husband left behind. So she's found favor with the Lord, and her favor comes from her faithfulness. Just like we see with Job, just like we see with Noah, God gives us favor when we're just faithful to him. And it doesn't matter where we come from. It doesn't matter that we once didn't believe. It doesn't matter that, who we used to be or what we used to be. God is so merciful, and he's willing and ready to accept us into his family. And that's what we see here. So Ruth continues to glean in this field, and eventually she is instructed by Naomi to go and lay before the feet of Boaz. And this is where, when a lot of people start to, interpret this story as a love story. And they say, oh, Ruth put herself out there and she went before Boaz and in the middle of the night, and she was bold and she was forward and she, but this is so much more than a love story. So she goes before Boaz, and Boaz, says, the Lord bless you, my daughter. This kindness is greater than that which you showed earlier. He says, you have not run after the younger men, whether rich or poor. And now, my daughter, don't be afraid. I will do for you all you ask. All the people of my town know that you are a woman of noble character. Although it is true that I am a guardian redeemer of our family, there is another who is more closely related than I. So Boaz is a man of order. He's very kind. He's shown his kindness and compassion for Ruth. But he says, I need to do things in order. There's somebody before me. And so how amazing is that? She's in a position where she now has to go home, and her mother-in-law, Naomi, tells her, wait, my daughter, wait. And that's a stopping point for us right now, because sometimes we get so anticipated, or we start to anticipate, the God's blessings. And somebody told you God is going to do this for you, and you start claiming it over your life. Or maybe God gave you a vision or whatever it is, and you're just so excited. You're so anxious about it. And I know I've been there before where, I get anxious about something and I think it's going to work out. I think I'm going to get that phone call from the job. They're going to give it to me or whatever it is. And I'm just not patient. And you can stop right here. And that's one thing we can learn, that sometimes the blessing is coming. God already told you it's going to come, or it looks like it's going to come, but you have to stop and be patient, okay? And let things be worked out. And that's exactly what God did in this situation. So this kinsman redeemer that is in line before Boaz to redeem this land. He technically could say, I want to redeem this land. But he says, buy it yourself. And he said that I cannot redeem it because I might endanger my own estate. That's chapter 4, verse 6. You redeem it yourself. I cannot do it. And so that's how God can just weave things, work things out. You know, he works things out so perfectly for us. He does things that we cannot do. You know, who would have thought that one, they would have come across Boaz, two, that he would have shown them so much kindness, and three, that even though there's somebody who's in line to redeem this land that Naomi's husband left behind before Boaz, he's made it so that the man doesn't even want to do it. And so Boaz is able to redeem this land. So the elders and all the people at the gate said, we are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the family of Israel. May you have standing in Ephrathah and be famous in Bethlehem. Through the offering the Lord gives you by this woman, may your family be like that of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah. And eventually Boaz and Ruth, they bear a son. And they named this son of theirs Obed. And Obed marries, when he gets of age, Jesse. And Jesse is the father of David, who starts the lineage of Jesus, or continues is a part of the lineage of Jesus. David is from whom Jesus descends from. And that's amazing. All she did, all Ruth did was she expected just some leftovers. That's all she wanted. She wanted leftovers just to survive. And so many of us just want to survive. We just want to live day by day. And sometimes we have to not think about the future. The Lord says, cast all your cares upon me. We don't have to worry about the future. But sometimes we just need something, that thing that is so important to us. But God says, I have way more for you. And it looks so tough and it looks so hard. Things just don't seem to be working out right. You don't seem to have favor. But God is working it out. He's working the good and the bad out. And he's going to bless us more abundantly than what we can ever even think. And it doesn't matter who you once were. It doesn't matter, what you once believed, what you used to do, who you used to be. God is so merciful and he loves us. He wants us in his family. And so if we are to pour out our faith in him, just like Ruth did, we will have those blessings. So this story is far more than a love story, okay? If you are reading the book of Ruth and all you get from the book of Ruth is that you need to put yourself out there to men and to get your husband, and if some man tells you, oh, well, Ruth did this, so you should do this, you should be pursuing your husband, and that's what you get from this story, I would say, go back, read it again. Ask the Holy Spirit to show to you all the different messages in this book, because this story is far more than a love story. It's a story about redemption. It's a story about how God can, take any person, regardless of who they once were, and accept them into his family. And not just into his family, but provide for them, make provisions for them, just how, God did for Ruth on the field, just how he did for Ruth and Naomi. He gave them favor on the field on Boaz's field. And who would have thought that this Moabite woman would be the woman from which Jesus would descend? And that's amazing. That's a story that illustrates God's goodness and his willingness to bless us abundantly. It shows us his mercy. It shows us how he redeems us. We can go from being like this Moabite woman, somebody who doesn't even believe, to being a part of Jesus' family. And that's amazing to me. So I urge you to ask any questions. If you have questions about this story, go back and read it for yourself. Know this story for yourself and stop I couldn't even really talk about all the different things, that God has revealed to me through this book. So I will probably do a part 2, but I encourage you to go and you read it and study it with somebody and really start to glean from this story all the things that there are by just kind of dissecting, each piece. And let's not gloss over it superficially and say, oh, this is a love story. It's a story of redemption. It's a story of mercy. It's a story of God's faithfulness. It's a story of God's favor, His power, and how He works everything for our good and for His glory. So if you have any questions, please leave them in the comment section. If you also have any comments, leave them in the comment section. Don't forget to subscribe, and please share this channel with other people. My ministry is called True Virtue Ministry, and I started it about 1.5 years ago. And I just want to reach the hearts of women and let them know just how wonderful our God is, and encourage them to live a life that is pleasing to the Lord. So go ahead and stay tuned, subscribe,